There we go. That's what I was just talking about. The Ding sein, thing being, Ding height. A horrible way to learn some German. Well, you're not wrong. There's a horrible way to learn some German is by looking at Heidegger, but we're trying to learn Heidegger at the same time. So that's my approach on that. But you're absolutely right that it's a truly baffling way to start learning German. What's up? Is my sound's a little low. Okay, is this higher? Is this better? Okay. We are continuing today. I got my fucking XQC shirt on, dude. Fuck yeah. I'm starting earlier today. I don't know if I'm gonna keep starting this early, but I don't know. I feel motivated to start earlier today. So last week I was starting later, like late afternoon to even evening. But today we're doing 12 o'clock Eastern time. If you're in California, we're talking the morning, top of the morning. We're gonna keep doing like we started last week. We're gonna keep doing The Origin of the Work of Art by Heidegger. I'm not gonna relitigate why I think this essay is worth working on, because I already did that last time, and it's in the recorded YouTube version. All streams do get ported over to YouTube, so you can check later. But of course, it's more fun to hang out here in while we're live, given that when we're live, you can chat, right? My joke name for these is philosophy speedruns, but of course, really what they are is philosophy reading groups. It's definitely the intention, although you're more than welcome to just listen. The intention is not that I'm just gonna talk at you, but rather that we're gonna work through these texts together, and you can chat and offer interpretations just as much as I can. So please hang out, join for the streams, and today we're gonna get into what is the thing, right? So the origin of the work of art, like I've said, is important not only because I think it gives an incredibly important and good definition of art that more or less changed my life in terms of my thinking about art when I read it for the first time about 5 years ago. More like 4 years ago, actually. It was when I was in grad school, despite kind of coming in with a strong analytic bent that made me particularly predisposed to dislike someone like Heidegger. Reading a lot of this stuff in grad school, my mind shifted. What shifted it really was reading the Logical Investigations by Husserl, which really blew my mind when I read it. And then opened the floodgates for me to get into other phenomenologists, like Heidegger being the other biggest one, obviously, but also Derrida, Merleau-Ponty, Sartre, etc. Levinas, and then other non-phenomenological continental stuff. But it changed my life in terms of thinking about art. But the other reason that I say, when I tell people to read this essay if they want to get into Heidegger, I'm saying that not only in the sense that it's a great essay about art, but it is the clearest and best statement of what Heidegger's idea of truth in his later work is. This is quote unquote one of the later essays after the turn or die Kehre, which basically is a division between early Heidegger, which is being in time. It's a lot of stuff, but what people read mostly that's early Heidegger is being in time. And then there's after being in time, which there is no book-like equivalent of being in time, specifically because one of the things involved in the turn is a rejection of the kind of large systematic philosophy or philosophical project that inspired being in time, or that Heidegger was chasing in being in time. Instead, you're only going to get these short essays on various topics. But in fact, they're on various topics, but they're all actually about the same thing. And so this one is on art. The question, like we looked at last week, is what is the origin of the work of art? In other words, what is the definition of the work of art? But the definition is actually the origin, right? Because it's the question to ask after the being of something, to use Heidegger's language, or to not use Heidegger's language, to ask what something is, to ask the meaning of something, or the definition, or the how it appears to you. You have to ask, what is its Ursprung, its origin? What gives it? And he's just made the argument, or the suggestion in the intro of this, that both artist and artwork are given by art, right? Because you could, one way you could answer, he says, the question, what is the origin of the artwork? It's the artist. The artist makes it. But then he says, well, how could there be an artist without an artwork? Because until you've made an artwork, you aren't an artist, right? So there's this kind of circular quality to it. And I wanted to actually, I meant to think a little bit about whether or not I think that's a fair, I think whether that example is fair or not, I'm still convinced, which is why I haven't thought about it. But if you have any ideas in the chat, of course, feel free to throw them in there about whether you think that's a convincing circle. But nonetheless, the point is for Heidegger that there's this hermeneutic circle, and you're asking what is the origin, but there is no origin because it's folding circularly. So then the origin that gives both, that starts the circle, is this thing called art. He's saying perhaps. Now we have to actually read the essay to ask what that is. But the reason that's interesting, not only for an art reason or philosophical aesthetics, although Heidegger doesn't like the word aesthetics because he thinks that falls back into metaphysics. He just wants to talk about art, nothing to do with aesthetics, is that this is fundamentally about truth. The other thing is that Heidegger's being in time and early work is written, despite it having some kind of, there are people often saying that being in time is very difficult, and I'm not saying it's not. It is written fairly clearly. It is written, I mean, densely, but clearly. It is written in the style of post-Kantian German philosophy. It is systematic. It works out point by point. It's the stages of its argument. It's systematic in the sense that German philosophy tended to be after Kant. The post-Kehre Heidegger, post-turn, Kehre just means Kehre, die Kehre just means turn in German. His writings became increasingly more circular and poetic, and potentially, as a diss or as a compliment, mystical. And there's a key to this, because for Heidegger, the thinking of being, in a certain sense, there's an end of philosophy, a completion of philosophy, which is achieved in, I think Heidegger would say, in Nietzsche. But basically in 19th century philosophy, at some point, it was completed, the end in that Hegelian sense. And then there's the question, the task of thinking that emerges, and Heidegger's going to prefer a word like thinking to philosophy because he prefers these words that are immediate and concrete. The task of thinking, in a certain sense, also becomes the task of poetizing, or of poetic thinking specifically. So, and how he ends up defining art turns out not to just be describing, well, the artwork is this, it has these properties, which would be aesthetics, the bad kind of metaphysics that Heidegger wants to get rid of. Art turns out to be what sets to work the truth of being. And I'm spoiling the essay right now by saying that, but we'll get there. And obviously there's no such thing as spoilers anyway. The origin of the work of art makes so clear actually what post-turn Heidegger is, because he makes clear what it means to say the being is the truth-giving event of coming into being, right? So one way that the turn is also, in addition to the writing style, sometimes characterized is that from the beginning of Heidegger, there's a relation between Dasein, right, which is like human beings maybe, but it's complicated, Dasein and being. But the early Heidegger emphasized the Dasein half of that relation, and the later Heidegger emphasizes the being or Sein aspect of that. But to say what is the truth of the On the Essence of Truth is also a great essay on that. What is Heidegger's theory of truth? But the origin of the work of art just makes it so clear. That's why I think it's the best one to read to get into later Heidegger. Because it both emphasizes by using the example of architecture and art in general, but especially the Greek temple was what really makes it clear, I think. The way that art plays this crucial role in the unveiling of being, or the setting to work of truth. It also makes clear why the writing becomes so much more like poetry and so much less like philosophy, because Heidegger thinks it's through art finally that the task of thinking can begin or can be undertaken. So that's going again over what I think is valuable about this essay, but we can actually get into reading it. So we're not actually too deep into it. If you want to see what we already did, like I said, the VODs get posted on YouTube. So let's scroll down here to what page is Origin of the Work of Art on? 146. Okay. So like I said, we've got not like I said, but like I said last time, we've got here the PDF that you can look at on the left, and then above this picture of me, we have my notes. These are my notes from when I first read this 4 years ago. So I've learned a lot more since then. So we'll look at the notes, and they'll be useful or they won't. I was much newer to Heidegger and to phenomenology back then than I am now. But so let's get started. And like I said, please chat, with questions or observations, or feel free to argue with me if you think something I'm saying is wrong. I know a lot about Heidegger at this point, but I don't think, in Heideggerian fashion, I think we're always underway to knowing. So I certainly don't think there's anything that I know beyond a doubt or anything like that. Also, let me know if there's any problems with the audio or anything, but it looks like we're okay. So, thing and work. What in truth is the thing so far as it is a thing? And remember that we're starting with this thing and work because we're trying to ask what the artwork is. Work means artwork. And the assumption is that the artwork is a thing. And what has already happened to make Heidegger want to turn there is to say, well, it's true that in the artwork, the other speaks, right, which is an etymological working out of allegory. You know, the painting of, or, you know, Holderlin's poem of the Rhine depicts or speaks of the Rhine, the place other than the particular page you're looking at with printed ink on paper. And yet that thingness comes through. It is fundamentally an object. You can pick this book up and take it somewhere else and leave it sitting on your desk and have it there and sell it at a certain price. It has a thingliness. And, you know, like I was saying last time, one of my favorite things about going to galleries, especially actually, although I mostly engage with more like avant-garde contemporary type of art, which I enjoy doing with this too, but especially with like, you know, like classical paintings, being able to see, like when you go from a distance, the way the painting looks like whatever it depicts, but when you get up close and that image disappears and it turns into clumps on the paint. And I always do this, I'm always scanning, trying to find the parts where the paint is chipping, where I was saying last time, when I found in a Jasper Johns piece a hair of some kind stuck in the paint. I thought that was amazing. The thingliness coming through. What Heidegger actually says is, I think, the stoniness of the stone. Yeah, he says, there is something stony in a work of architecture, wooden in a carving, colored in a painting, spoken in a linguistic work, sonorous in a musical composition. In other words, even while the artwork speaks otherwise, right? That other, the other that comes and speaks, perches itself on the thing, right? So there has to be a thing for it to perch itself on, and that's why we're turning to this question: what is a thing? Let's figure out what a thing is, so that we can ask what a work is. Although it might end up, spoiler alert, that we go through all this because Heidegger loves to be underway to thought, which is to say, to have a hypothesis, to explore it, and then at the end realize we were mistaken in our initial assumptions. And that might be where we're going here, where it might turn out that, wink, wink, it will turn out that an artwork, in fact, is not a thing. But for now, we're in the first section, the first of the 3 sections. These were lectures given live in person over 3 days. So there's 3 sections for 3 days. The thing and work section, where we first try to figure out what a thing is and then figure out what type of thing a work is. So let's get started. What in truth is the thing so far as it is a thing? When we inquire in this way, our aim is to come to know the thing being, thingness of the thing. The point is to discover the thingly character of the thing. To this end, we have to be acquainted with the sphere to which all those entities belong, which we have long called by the name of thing. And I also have that we can look at the actual German text, And I am interested what thing being is. Das Ding sein. So Ding is thing in German, and sein is being. So that's literally the thing being. Height. Ding height is thingness, which is interesting. Sorry, it's very zoomed out. I don't know why it's so zoomed out. Let's get this in. Oh, too far. So there we go. That's what I was just talking about. The Ding sein, thing being, Ding height. A horrible way to learn some German. Well, you're not wrong. There's a horrible way to learn some German is by looking at Heidegger, but we're trying to learn Heidegger at the same time. So that's my approach on that. But you're absolutely right that it's a truly baffling way to start learning German. But yeah, Ding sein, thing being, or Ding height, thingness. What in truth is the thing, so far as it is a thing? What he's saying here, right, when he says to know a thing is to know the sphere to which all of those entities belong, is saying that to give it's a simple way of putting it, right? That to know what thing being is, you just ask, well, what makes all things things, right? What things belong in the sphere of thingliness, and what do they all have in common, right? That's the classical kind of going back to Plato or something philosophy, the basic way of doing philosophy. Like, if I want to know what all chairs are, then I think about everything that I call a chair and find out what they all have in common. And there's also things that they don't have in common. So they obviously, not all chairs are the same color. So this chair that I'm sitting in is black. But obviously there's a lot of chairs that are not black. So I can cut color off as an important essential definition of the chair. It would seem like probably a chair has to be something that someone might at least decide or see as possible to sit in. That's probably an essential characteristic, etc. And you can find out the chairness of the chair. That's what Plato's doing, right? So this looks like, and again, Heidegger is always challenging these kind of classic ways of thinking. So he might actually, in the end, not agree with this style of doing philosophy. But at least right now, it looks like he is. He's trying to ask, what is a thing? Well, what do all things have to be things? So let's keep reading. He's going to give some examples right here of things that we can call things. Just some way we can think of chairs that we can call chairs. The stone in the road is a thing, as is the clod in the field. A jug is a thing, as is the well beside the road. But what about the milk in the jug and the water in the well? These two are things if the cloud in the sky and the thistle in the field, the leaf in the autumn breeze and the hawk over the wood are rightly called by the name of thing. All these must indeed be called things if the name is applied even to that which does not, like those just enumerated, show itself, i.e., that which does not appear. According to Kant, the whole of the world, for example, and even God himself, is a thing of this sort, a thing that does not itself appear, namely, a thing in itself. In the language of philosophy, both things in themselves and things that appear, all beings that in any way are called things. So, yeah, right. Good grief. The beginning part of this is fairly straightforward and not too complicated, right? The stone in the road is a thing. The clod in the field is a thing. These are all examples of, Heidegger's a bit, he was from rural southern Germany, and all his examples have to do with that. It's very naturalistic images. That seems pretty straightforward to call those things things. But then he makes that really weird claim. All these things must indeed be called things if the name is applied even to that which does not, like those just enumerated, show itself, i.e. that which does not appear. Now that's a strange way of putting it. He tells us this is according to Kant's view, which gives us a way in if we know Kant's philosophy. And what Kant thinks, right, the thing in itself is that there's no unmediated access to things. Whenever you look at something, for it to become intelligible to you, it has to appear to a subject. So there's a difference between the appearing of something, the way in which I perceive it, according to my categories of cognition, which is different from the thing in itself, right? The thing as it would be unmediated or mediated for a subject. If we try to keep it simple, it's just a way of saying, I mean, there's no way to keep it simple without losing something of Kant. But I look at this mug, and I attribute certain properties to it, that has this shape. I see this view of it. It exists in relation to other things. Theoretically, there's a lot of different ways, things I could understand. I could see. This isn't really what Kant means, but this could be an example of it, right? Like if you think of the mug as made up of subatomic particles, really, finally, in the final instance, which Kant doesn't think that, but we could pretend he does just to help make this clearer. Why do I think this handle is the same object as whatever you call this, the body of the mug? Why do I connect those smaller particles together into one object and say these are all the same thing, but the ones in this book are not the same thing? Well, Kant would say, well, maybe in a real, totally mind-independent way, the mug really does exist, the book really does exist, or maybe not, but that's just something we don't know, and we have to accept that we could never know that. We can only know that there is a mug for me, or there is a book for me, in the sense that the way I'm like neurologically programmed, Kant doesn't really mean it neurologically either, but this is just an example. The way that my capacity for understanding affects the objects I look at is what forms them into the objects that they are. And so that's what it means to say they don't appear. The book appears, but only as I kind of gather it via my cognitive faculties. And that's different from the book independent of me, which does not appear. So when Heidegger says here, all these things must indeed be called things if the name is applied even to that which does not, like those just enumerated, show itself, i.e. that which does not appear. Given the fact that he cites Kant, I think this is what we have to have in mind. The whole of the world, for example, and even God himself, is a thing of this sort, a thing that does not itself appear. namely a thing in itself. And that's the word that Kant uses, thing in itself, for not the appearance of the book, but the object that might or might not, we just don't have access to it, exist independently of me. He calls it a thing in itself rather than like a thing for me or something. I don't the reason though this is slightly confusing to me is I don't know why the cloud in the sky and the thistle in the field, the leaf in the autumn breeze, and why do those things not appear? If you're in the chat and you do know, please feel free to say, because I'm really not sure. I genuinely don't know why the stone in the road doesn't appear. Unless he just means in a really weird way, he's saying I don't see, I don't look into the well at this moment at least, and I don't see the water, so it's not appearing. That doesn't seem quite right. Let me just read the paragraph one more time and see if I can make it make sense. The stone in the road is a thing, as is the clod in the field. A jug is a thing, as is the well beside the road. But what about the milk in the jug and the water in the well? These two are things if the cloud in the sky and the thistle in the field, the leaf in the autumn breeze and the hawk over the wood are rightly called by the name of thing. All these must indeed be called things if the name is applied even to that which does not, like those just enumerated, show itself, i.e., that which does not appear. According to Kant, the whole of the world, for example, and even God himself, is a thing of this sort, a thing that does not itself appear, namely, a thing in itself. In the language of philosophy, both things in themselves and things that appear, all beings that in any way are called things. I'm a little bit tempted to just focus on the last sentence, which makes perfect sense to me, and ignore this, at least for now, and come back later to the question of why does the thistle in the field not appear? Because in the language of philosophy, both things in themselves and things that appear, it's just saying, right? Kant gives this definition between the appearance versus the thing in itself. It's an important division in philosophy, and they're both called things, right? Thing can both refer to that. Yeah, I'm overthinking it for sure. I mean, I don't know. What are you thinking, or what's your idea for what he means by it? It's I mean, it's possible. I'm just It's fairly straightforward. I just don't know what it means to say they don't appear, but yeah. It also, let me see if there's anything in my notes that I put down. Yeah, can't see the trees for the forest. Yeah? Yeah, there's some way that um yeah, actually that would make sense also, since in Being in Time he talks about the way that, you know, a philosopher stops and looks at a hammer and says, you know, what is the hammer? Or what is a hammer really? But that's not how people who use a hammer actually use it. That in a certain way, even when you're hammering, the you barely even notice that the hammer is there. It's until you smack your finger or something, you're just using the hammer and it disappears in its use. So that can make that makes sense. It's like you can't see the thing does not appear because it disappears into its world. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. Yeah, could be. Let me. I need to change. I don't know. I had the chat color set to black so that it would show up, but now it seems to have reverted to white. So let me see if I can fix this. I don't know if that might fix it. We'll see. Okay, let's keep reading. Let's not spend too long on this. Airplanes and radio sets are nowadays among the things closest to us. But when we have in mind the last things we think of, the last things in terms of like death. That's a weird way to put it. Airplanes and radio sets are nowadays among the things closest to us. But when we have in mind the last things, we think of something different altogether, or something altogether different. Death and judgment, these are the last things. On the whole, the word thing here designates whatever is not simply nothing. In this sense, the work of art is also a thing, so far as it is some sort of being. Yet this concept is of no use to us, at least immediately, in our attempt to delimit entities that have the mode of being of a thing as against those having the mode of being of a work. And besides, we hesitate to call God a thing. In the same way, we hesitate to consider the peasant in the field, the stoker at the boiler, the teacher in the school as things. A man is not a thing. It is true that we speak of a young girl who is faced with a task too difficult for her as being a young thing, still too young for it, but only because we feel that being human is in a certain way missing here, and think that instead we have to do here with the factor that constitutes the thingly character of things. I remember reading that the first time 4 years ago and just being like, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? We hesitate even to call the deer in the forest clearing, the beetle in the grass, the blade of grass a thing. Well, not the essay in general, just this specific sentence. I think is funny. We would sooner think of a hammer as a thing, or as a shoe, or an axe, or a clock, but even these are not mere things. Only a stone, a clod of earth, a piece of wood are for us such mere things. Lifeless beings of nature and objects of use. Natural things and utensils are the things commonly so called. So what did I put in my notes when I read this before? Thus, we are not just talking about objects, but beings like death and judgment. In other words, things that are, insofar as they are not simply nothing. Death is, insofar as it is a thing which everyone experiences, so at least in some sense, an artwork is a thing. One does, in fact, experience it and is not simply nothing. Right. So death is not simply nothing in the sense that thing, we're getting a increasingly retreatingly minimal definition of thing, where we've gone from the stoniness of things to things are things which appear, to even, death is a thing because we experience it, even though it's not we don't even get a positive definition, we just get a negative definition. It's not simply nothing. It's in that sense that the work of art is also a thing, so far as it is some sort of being. Yet this concept is of no use to us, at least immediately, in our attempt to delimit entities that have the mode of being of a thing as against those having the mode of being of a work, right? So I guess that's what I'm saying here, right? It's not actually, we know that artwork at least must be a thing of some kind insofar as we experience it, but it doesn't really help us to say that, doesn't actually really give us very much information. And this is where I guess already Heidegger is starting to walk back his earlier thought. Because remember that Heidegger, like I was saying earlier, Heidegger treats these essays as being underway to thought. So he has some sense that rather than just giving you the information like most philosophers do, he's going to give you an idea and even like start making the argument, but then start to see the flaws in his own argument and start again, right? With the sense that that's important, he thinks, for thinking, is to take you through the path of thinking rather than to just show you the outcome. That's true. That's true. That's fair. Yeah. His certainly not his political or moral judgment, absolutely, and maybe not his philosophical judgment either. But that one's more complicated. So, but anyway, he starts to walk this back already and starts to say that maybe a thing is not actually the right way to think about an artwork. Basically saying, right, that it's essentially in a certain way just that it feels almost offensive somehow to refer to people as things. That they seem that because people have rich inner lives or something like that, it's not really, despite the fact that they would meet the definition we were just talking about of you encounter a thing and it has some thing in itselfness. This doesn't really explain, this doesn't really feel right as a definition for a person, because a person isn't just a thing. A person is a person with an inner life, with their own hopes, dreams, desires, and especially, I guess, importantly, their own consciousness or their own self-consciousness, which would be different than a thing, which is what the end of that paragraph. We would sooner think of a hammer as a thing, or a shoe, or an axe, or a clock, but even these are not mere things. I guess because they're built by, is what he would mean by that. They're, you don't encounter a shoe or a clock in nature. A person makes them, and that's why they're not mere things. Only a stone, a clod of earth, a piece of wood are for us such mere things. Lifeless beings of nature and objects of use. Natural things and utensils are the things commonly so called. So let's keep moving on. We thus see ourselves brought back from the widest domain, within which everything is a thing. Thing equals res, that's the Latin. Res extensa is in Descartes. Extended things equals ens, a being, including even the highest and last things. Right, so the highest and last, that literally what he means there is basically God and death, which are, in the Aristotelian sense, there's a great spectrum of perfection and imperfection, where perfection is also tied to actualization and imperfection to possibility. God is absolute perfection, absolute completion, and nothingness or death is absolute imperfection, which the absolute's the wrong word for it. Total imperfection, total possibility, no actuality. And then the material world is between those two things. So we see ourselves brought back to where instead of thing is everything is a thing, even the highest and last thing, to the narrow precinct of mere things. Mere here means first the pure thing, which is simply a thing and nothing more, but then at the same time it means that which is only a thing in an almost pejorative sense. It is mere things, excluding even utensils, that count as things in the proper sense. What does the thingly character of these things then consist in? It is in reference to these that the thingness of things must be determinable. This determination enables us to characterize, what it is that is thingly as such. Thus prepared, we are able to characterize the almost palpable actuality of works in which something else it inheres. Right? That's what I was talking about earlier, that the artwork is an allegory. It's something elsewhere landing on the thing. Thanks for the follow, Some Gunner. And thanks for hanging out and chatting. I'm actually curious to look at the German quickly and see if it tells us anything interesting, what the definition of mere is here. So, das bloß meint hier einmal. Is that where we're looking? I guess maybe that is what he means, or what. If only I was perfect in German. Yeah, cheers. Thank you. Is that Hearthstone? Nice. Are you a Hearthstone player? I don't know. Well, we can come back to that later if we feel like it. I'm gonna let's just, the best thing to do in general, but especially when you're reading Heidegger, is go to Wiktionary and get those. And I don't have the best way to do. Oh, okay. To do the German S on here, because I don't have a German keyboard. Okay, but it gets it anyway. Oh, it is literally just direct. Uncovered, nude. That's actually useful for Heidegger to know that it's uncovered or nude. because for Heidegger, it's always about covering and uncovering. The truth is what's fully uncovered. So mirror is the pure thing, the most uncovered or naked thing. So basically, if we work our, instead of that initial definition where literally everything counted as a thing, so much so that a definition of thing became basically meaningless or useless, once we work our way down to this very basic, mere, very simple definition of things are just lifeless beings of nature that are independent of human use. So basically, yeah, rocks, clods of earth, wood, piece of wood as mere things. Now we have a more constrained sphere of things that are counting as things. So we can start to work our way towards actually giving a definition, right? So that's kind of how Heidegger goes. We go on this winding path where we're asking what is a thing, and we're saying, talking about death and all this, and then we're like, eventually we find our way and we find, oh, this is what a thing is, according to Heidegger, is rocks and clods of earth. All right, let's keep reading. Hello, Giant Frame. Thanks for the follow. Feel free to hang out in chat if you would like to, or watch silently. Yeah, clods of earth. Hell yeah. Yeah, we got clods of earth. We've got thistles in the field, pieces of wood. All very cool things one might be. Sorry about the chat. Let's just move it for now. I don't know why the color is messed up. All right. Let's keep reading. Now, it passes for a known fact that as far back as antiquity, no sooner was the question raised as to what beings are in general than things in their thingness thrust themselves into prominence again and again as the standard type of beings. Consequently, we are bound to meet with a definition of the thingness of things already in the traditional interpretations of beings. We thus need only to ascertain explicitly this traditional knowledge of the thing to be relieved of the tedious labor of making our own search for the thingly character of the thing. The answers to the question, what is the thing, are so familiar that we no longer sense anything questionable behind them. So what he's doing there, which is sometimes people meme on Heidegger a bit for saying the same things over and over, is that, the beginning of being in time, he talks about how we're so comfortable with the idea of being that we don't even think it's a problem to ask, what is the question of being? It feels obvious to us. And the example he gives is they're like the glasses on your face, right? It's so close to you that you can't see it. But it's actually an essential question to ask, what is being? But you can't even ask it, or it's hard to even figure out how to ask it because you barely even realize that this is mediating your experience. It's just so close to you. It's as if it was transparent. He's doing the same thing here. We're basically saying, in ancient philosophy, this became a question, the thingness of things. But we nowadays, we just sort of take for granted whatever was said in ancient philosophy, and in so doing inherit their mistakes. And so we need to go back and rethink from the beginning, right? This is why Heidegger's always emphasizing this question of beginnings, beginning again, right? That instead of sticking with what we've inherited in Western philosophy, that's mainly from ancient Greece, at least that's how he's conceiving it. Although there's evidence to be made, arguments to be made that ancient Greek philosophy also had deep influence from Mesopotamia, from Egypt, from India, so that's probably not even true. But nonetheless, obviously, Plato and Aristotle especially are foundational to Western philosophy. But, that rather than building more and more off this tradition, Heidegger thinks that there's mistakes that were made all the way back then that had just become more and more crusted up over time. And we have to rip it all up and start again. And at least in this case, right, the definition of the thingness of things, we're already bound to that definition. Right, so that when he says that in that sentence, we thus need only to ascertain explicitly this traditional knowledge of the thing to be relieved of the tedious labor of making our own search for the thingly character of the thing. He's basically just complaining like people just accept this for granted to save them because they're too lazy. They don't want to do the tedious labor of making their search for the thingly character of the thing. Just accept what ancient philosophy told us or did, and just stick with it, and don't do the tedious work, the hard work of figuring it out for yourself. So that's what that is, right? It's just the paragraph saying we need to go back or reawaken this question of what is the thingness of the thing. So let's keep reading. And some of the things I just said are going to clearly come out, as you can see in these following paragraphs. The interpretation of the thingness of the thing, which, predominant in the course of Western thought, long ago became self-evident, the interpretations long ago became self-evident and are now in everyday use, may be reduced to three. Sorry, I skipped some words there. So this is there's three interpretations. And I have them in my notes from before, so we can put those up. We're going to read them, but there's three interpretations. And these are the... thanks for stopping by, Some Gunner. It was good chatting, and enjoy your dinner. So, three predominant interpretations of the thing in ancient philosophy that we've accepted. And I'll just show you the three right now, but we're going to read this and Heidegger will get into them. There's the thing as the core. This is the Greek word. Sorry, I don't know ancient Greek pronunciation, but like to hypokamenon. That's my best guess. If you do know Greek, feel free to throw it in the pronunciation in the chat. Thing is aistheton, that which is perceived by the senses. I'm assuming that word is etymologically connected to aesthetics, not only in the sense of aesthetics of art, but also Kant's transcendental aesthetic, and things as highly and morphe. Is that Latin or is that Greek? I think it's Greek, but form and matter. So those are going to be the three things we've inherited. And what Heidegger means regards to what I was just talking about is everyone basically, he's saying, believes in one of those three definitions. And they basically just take it for granted and don't dive into or question or ask where these three interpretations come from. And obviously, as you can kind of expect from what he was just saying, he thinks that all three of those interpretations finally are going to be wrong. So he'll explain them, and then he'll show the limitations of each of them. Sorry, just a second. Another thing I forgot to point out in the paragraph above is that no sooner was the question raised as to what beings are in general than things in their thingness thrust themselves into prominence again and again as the standard types of being. So remember that if you follow Being in Time, or if you watch other streams, or if not, then here I'm saying it now for the first time. An important question of what does it mean to say what is the being of Dasein, what is the being of human beings, is that they're not things. There's a lot of classic definitions. Humans are a rational thing, they're a social thing, they're a language having thing, whatever. For Heidegger, all those are already wrong because they just take for granted that humans are things. So that's also what he's saying here. Things in their thingness thrust themselves into prominence again and again as the standard types of beings. So the question, which also this essay is, the question is what is an artwork, not what is a human being. But that's going to turn out also, since everything is taken to be things, right, which is the kind of critique he was just attacking until he brought it in, or sorry, the definition rather that he's attacking, until he brought things into what he thinks is a better definition, which is just objects, natural objects that are not conscious in any way, and that also have not been affected by, or not been like created by humans, which would be like an artifact. There's a question of whether artworks can be said to be things. But so, okay, so let's do these three definitions of things, and the first one is going to be this to hypokamenon. Need some water. Starting right there. This block of granite, for example, is a mere thing. It is hard, heavy. These were lectures given in person, so the fact that it says this block of granite, I'm wondering if he was like holding up, I don't know, holding up a block of granite or something. It reminds me of in undergrad when I was taking a class with the professor Elijah Milgram on Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein talks a lot about slabs, and I remember he brought in a gigantic, like, I don't know, it was huge, like a big, huge slab of chocolate, and he threw it on the table and smashed chocolate everywhere in the room to make a point about what Wittgenstein means by slabs, which was very funny and very memorable. Although ironic, since he would get really pissed at anyone who brought food to class, and then he spilled chocolate all over the class. But anyway, this block of granite, have that image in your head, Heidegger holding up a big block of granite or chocolate or whatever. This block of granite, for example, is a mere thing. It is hard, heavy, extended, bulky, shapeless, rough, colored, partly dull, partly shiny. We can take note of all these features in the stone. Thus we acknowledge its characteristics. But still, the traits signify something proper to the stone itself. They are its properties. The thing has them. The thing? What are we thinking of when we now have the thing in mind? Obviously, a thing is not merely an aggregate of traits, nor an accumulation of properties by which that aggregate arises. A thing, as everyone thinks he knows, is that around which the properties have assembled. We speak in this connection of the core of things. The Greeks are supposed to have called it to hypokamenon. For them, the core of the thing was something lying at the ground of the thing, something always already there. The characteristics, however, are called Like I said, I don't know Greek pronunciation, so if you're Greek, I'm sorry. The characteristics, however, are called ta symbebekota, that which has always turned up already along with the given core and occurs along with it. So the view basically is something like, right, if you have the granite and the it sounds a little bit like, I don't know if that's right or not because we're talking about ancient Greek philosophies, but it sounds a little bit like Locke's primary and secondary qualities. Like there's the core of the granite, the thing that it really is, and then there's the characteristics that turn up alongside the core. That's a very carefully worded way of putting it. It's like the secondary qualities of the thing, which are like color, which are maybe not internal to the thing, right? I mean, like color is literally the way light reflects off a thing, right? So arguably color is not in the granite, but there's some primary quality about the granite which causes the secondary quality of the color. So I think that's a fair way to describe what he's talking about, right? There's the core, which is the real fundamental ingredients that are always already there, which this is a word that Heidegger came up with that has been used and abused in many fields, especially like literary studies. But always already is basically just a way of describing the kind of transcendental move where you talk about how something is necessary for something to be, as necessary as a precondition. So in a certain sense, there's something maybe, this is obviously a point of great dispute, but maybe causal, but at least related in some way, but that it's always already happened. So there's this relation, but it never is actually in time. It's always already happened. This would be a good time actually just to look at the German of this quickly. So is this always already immer schon? I think it is. Yeah. Yeah, so there you go. That's the original. If you ever see that phrase, you can tell people it's from Heidegger and tell them the original word that it actually is, immer schon. Okay. So that's the first definition that we have, the to hypokeimenon. And the secondary qualities always, I like how careful that phrasing is. They always turned up already along with the given core and occurs along with it. So the secondary qualities are separate from the primary qualities, but they always turn up along with the given core. We don't know why, at least in what Heidegger's given us here, but there are these, that's one view of the thing. The thing is its primary core and the secondary characteristics that always turn up along with it. Let's keep reading. Except I need more water. And it really gets your vocal cords when you're doing this. I've been speaking louder than normal also today, so that's partially what's going on here. Okay. These designations are no arbitrary names. Something that lies beyond the purview of this essay speaks in them, the basic Greek experience of the being of beings in the sense of presence. So we actually should stop there because there's at least two really important things going on here. The basic Greek experience of the being of beings, what it means to say that Heidegger thinks, right, that one of the reasons that he thinks it's bad to keep using these old ideas is that, right, for Heidegger, being's in your face. It shows up in the context of your life, your being in the world. When the Greeks used certain words that became philosophical concepts, they were directly related, Heidegger thinks, to their basic experience of life, right? It means specifically the ancient Greek experience. So not even if you're Greek today, it still wouldn't apply to you, right? It applies to words that emerge in a specific time in relation, your language related to your specific experience. To use them today, Heidegger thinks, is to try to describe your present day experience with the sedimented, crusty, decaying ancient language of people from 2,000 years ago who had completely different experiences, right? You have to dig this up to get back a new beginning that actually you have a direct experience of the being of beings, the things that you're talking about. So you're not using words from 2,000 years ago that don't apply to your present, right? You need to constantly be rethinking your philosophical concepts and retuning them to your present. So when he says the basic Greek experience, he means that what speaks in them, what speaks in this definition of things, is the basic Greek experience, the particular way that Greek philosophers or just Greek thinkers generally, or even just anyone who lived in ancient Greece, experience the being of beings. That's what speaks in them. So it's a historical past or something like that. And he also says the being of beings in the sense of presence. So what speaks in them, or what is what this particular framing or this particular way of talking about the being of beings says of the Greek experience, is that beings are presence. We'll go on too long of a detour if we try to explain what is meant by presence. But this is one of the most important parts of being in time for Heidegger, that the way beings have been described has ignored time completely. Only they're present, the way they're present to you immediately. So you ask what someone is, you say like what they're doing, or what, all these, what your job is, what particular desires you have, whatever. Things that are tied specifically to your present. But Heidegger thinks we're thrown out of the past into our present, which is projected towards our future, which is a careful way of having past, present, and future all interrelated. We're not just discrete, like Hume thought, discrete bundles of perceptions at different times. We are stretched over time. So that's also Heidegger's critique of using this ancient Greek language, is that there was a sense of the being of beings as presence, which Heidegger thinks is wrong, finally. So those are just two really important things that are kind of buried into that sentence right there. Okay, so let's keep reading. Something that lies beyond the purview of this essay speaks in them, the basic Greek experience of the being of beings in the sense of presence. It is by these determinations, however, that the interpretation of the thingness of the thing is established, which henceforth becomes standard, and the Western interpretation of the being of beings stabilized. Right, and so that second sentence is also saying what I was just saying. It was one thing for people in ancient Greece to use these things in a way that captured their own particular experience of being, which is fine, really. And then there's something really bad about taking that particular historically located understanding of the being of beings in ancient Greece and trying to apply it for all history, for all cultures and places ever since. The process begins with the appropriation of Greek words by Roman Latin thought. Hypokeimenon becomes subjectum, which will become subject, obviously. Hypostasis becomes substantia, which will become substance in English. And symbekos becomes accidens, which is accident, right? Those, what I was calling secondary qualities earlier, could also be called accidental qualities, right? So you have the substance, the core of what something is, the primary qualities, and the accidental qualities, the secondary things like color that I was talking about. However, this translation of Greek names into Latin is in no way the innocent process it is considered to this day. Beneath the seemingly literal and thus faithful translation, there is concealed, rather, a translation of Greek experience into a different way of thinking. Roman thought takes over the Greek words without a corresponding, equally original experience of what they say, without the Greek word. The rootlessness of Western thought begins with this translation. All right, so I actually kind of, I guess I jumped ahead of myself because that's what he ended up talking about in the rest of the paragraph, right? Roman thought takes over the Greek words without a corresponding, equally original experience. Also, obviously, this is one of the ways you could challenge or question some of Heidegger's thinking in does this play into his engagement with Nazism, this concern with rootlessness. But also I think it's one of the reasons people like Derrida do interesting things with Heidegger, because he takes seriously some of these ideas while also kind of challenging this obsession with origin. But yeah, let's keep reading. According to current opinion, this definition of the thingness of the thing as the substance with its accidents seems to correspond to our natural outlook on things. No wonder that the current attitude toward things, our way of addressing ourselves to things and speaking about them, has adapted itself to this common view of the thing. A simple propositional statement consists of the subject, which is the Latin translation, hence already a reinterpretation of hypokeimenon, and the predicate in which the thing's traits are stated of it. So you already see there that, for Heidegger, there's no such thing as a pure or a straightforward translation, right? To translate is always to reinterpret, which is why, rather than just taking Greek philosophical concepts and translating them into Latin, he thinks you should be, going out, leave your study and go out into the world and develop in your own language, in Latin in this case, a direct, concrete experience of the world, of the things that you're describing, rather than just trying to translate or take the Greek version of it. So sorry, we're here right here. Who would have the temerity? Who would have the temerity to assail these simple fundamental relations between thing and statement, between sentence structure and thing structure? Nevertheless, we must ask, is the structure of a simple propositional statement, the combination of subject and predicate, the mere image of the structure of the thing, of the union of substance with accidents? Or could it be that even the structure of the thing as thus envisaged is a projection of the framework of the sentence? So this could be, and I think should be taken as an explicit attack on the idea of the correspondence theory of truth. So, if you're not familiar, the correspondence theory of truth would be something like the idea that you could have some proposition. Let's keep it simple. The black cat is on the mat or something, and that you could match or make correspond the structure of the sentence and the structure of the world. I'm keeping it simple. And so you have the substance cat. I should say the black cat is on the blue mat. You have two substances, the cat and the mat. You have their predicates, black in the case of the cat and blue in the case of the mat, and you have their relation, the prepositional relation. The cat is on top of the mat, right? So, and Heidegger's saying, well, obviously, this view that there's a substance, cat, and that there's a predicate, black, how could anyone disagree with that being the correct way to describe it, since obviously that's what there is. There's a black cat on a blue mat. But what he's suggesting here at the end is that the structure of the thing as it's envisaged might be a projection of the framework of the sentence. The particular way in which we're using language here is actually influencing, directly affecting how we're seeing the world and understanding it and thinking about it. So, and obviously, as you might guess, that's where he's going to go. So there's going to be an explicit critique of the correspondence theory of truth, where rather than it being proof that the correspondence theory of truth works because it looks like the world as we see it, we see rather we are trapped by the correspondence theory of truth into seeing the world in its structure when there are ways it might be otherwise. Let's keep reading. What could be more obvious than that man transposes his propositional way of understanding things into the structure of the thing itself? Yet this view, seemingly critical, yet actually rash and ill-considered, would have to explain first how such a transposition of propositional structure into the thing is supposed to be possible without the thing having already become visible. The question as to which comes first and functions as the standard proposition structure or thing structure remains to this hour undecided. It even remains doubtful whether in this form the question is at all decidable. Actually, the sentence structure does not provide the standard for the pattern of thing structure, nor is the latter simply mirrored in the former. Both sentence and thing structure derive, in their typical form and their possible mutual relationship from a common and more original source. In any case, this first interpretation of the thingness of the thing as bearer of its characteristic traits, despite its currency, is not as natural as it appears to be. What seems natural to us is probably just something familiar in a long tradition that has forgotten the unfamiliar source from which it arose. And yet, this unfamiliar source once struck man as strange and caused him to think and to wonder. I might need to take a quick break just for a second to get some tea or something, because my throat is getting a little dry. Right, but so that those two paragraphs got pretty deep into what I was just talking about, right? So I guess the way I said it, that the correspondence theory of truth is determining or the way that we see the world is actually, well, basically the view that he here is calling actually rash and ill-considered. Right, he's saying that to say that would be too much in a certain way, because we'd have to explain how such a transposition is possible. And he finally basically says, sorry, my throat is getting... yeah, I'll have to take a break in a second. The question as to which comes first and functions as a standard proposition structure or thing structure remains undecided. In fact, it may not even be possible to answer that question. The sentence structure, both the sentence structure and the thing structure have a mutual relationship, but they derive from a common and more original source. So I think this has to do with what Heidegger means by aletheia, or the open region of beings, right? So it's not per se that the correspondence theory of truth is necessarily wrong, right? In a certain way, it's actually very useful for certain things you might want to do, especially anything pragmatic, whether that's, making a bowl of oatmeal, doing empirical science, or winning a game of League of Legends or something. All those things, and what those things, despite their great differences, have in common is that they're utility based. There's a specific set of conditions you want to achieve to win, whether that's win the game, or make a good bowl of oatmeal, or accurately predict a set of empirical phenomena. They're all, what's important to them is not even necessarily to say what is their being, but what is the relation between them, and how can I reliably reproduce a certain set of results. There's a cat underneath me, sorry. But both things, so there's this relation between them, and there's, it can be useful. Both things rely on a common and more original source. And that is, I think we're going to see, is of the event of opening, right? So there's a certain initial event of opening the region, and then the correspondence theory of truth between proposition and thing can happen within that region that has been opened. But first, it must be opened. So if we're doing what Heidegger's trying to do, where you ask the being of beings, you have to ask, how does that region first open in the first place? Which is not the same question as the correspondence theory, which is already working within the region that has already opened. But I think that's what we get to later, because art actually plays a crucial role in this. But first, we're going to stick to these definitions of the thing. And so that last part then kind of, so he brings that up, but he stops. But then he says, but rather than, despite the fact that this seems almost so obvious, it's not as natural as it appears to be. It seems natural to us, but it's actually familiar in a long tradition that has forgotten the unfamiliar source from which it arose. The unfamiliar source once struck man as strange and caused him to think and to wonder. And this is it's actually an important idea for Heidegger, the wonder. Philosophy always the thinking of being always begins in wonder, right? The kind of basic wonder of, why is there something rather than nothing, or the infinity of space or time, or those kinds of questions, right? That you first learn, or rather you first are interested in, right? I think everyone who studies philosophy, and also everyone ever really, I think at least someone, how could you be human and not at some point think about stuff like that? Just kind of that moment of just really like, wow, wow, that there's something rather than nothing. I am now, but one day I will die and I will no longer be, that kind of intense feeling. It's that initial excitement about that makes people want to study philosophy. But you study philosophy for a long time, and then you refine that question, you make it more scientific, more rigorous, and you start asking questions like, what kinds of properties supervene on what kind of a brain state B1, or whatever, right? And maybe we think that that's good, that we are developing our thought more and more, and that's what I thought for a long time. But this is one reason that Heidegger had a big effect on me, is that Heidegger sees that actually as a problem, because you've gotten further and further from the concrete thinking of being, where that concrete thinking of being is you're closest to it when you're in a moment of wonder, when you're being shocked by existence, by infinity, by the fact of being and death. And he's saying that this idea of the thing, it's become, like what I was just talking about, it's become natural feeling. It seems as if it emerged from nowhere, but it didn't. It emerged from history. But when it initially emerged, rather than feeling natural and boring and obvious, it felt shocking, and it felt like wonder. So that for Heidegger, it's actually important for philosophy to always be returning to those moments of wonder, those moments of the kind of shock of feeling like, why is there something rather than nothing? Okay, so like I said, I need to take just like a 5-minute break because my throat is burning a bit. I'm gonna quickly make myself like some tea or something, and I'll be back in like 5 minutes. Thanks for hanging out, everyone. And when I get back, we'll continue reading about the different conceptions of the thing that we have inherited from ancient Greek philosophy. So I'll be right back. And yeah, feel free to obviously to keep hanging out, to follow, and to chat. My hope is that in addition to just me talking, we can also talk about the text and have like a reading group space also here for what we're doing right now, which is The Origin of the Work of Art by Heidegger. Okay, so just 5 minutes. I just quickly need to make some tea, or my throat is gonna is gonna explode. Okay, I'm delaying it because my throat still hurts a little bit. I don't know why it hurts so bad. So I might keep the stream a little bit short today, but I'm thinking we can go for at least another hour. But yeah, we're going through the three. That's all right. The three definitions of the thing inherited from ancient Greek philosophy, and the first one is the to hypokamenon, the core, which gets translated as subject, and the secondary qualities or the accidental properties, which gets translated as accidents. And where we had just left off, there was this question of, this view is essentially the correspondence theory, and where we had left off, there was a strong sense that there was the question whether because one of the reason that view is so pervasive, so deep down, is that it seems to just accurately describe how the world is. But Heidegger questions whether it can be said to whether it's merely describing the world as it actually is, or whether there's some influence, or whether the influence goes some other way. And also the sense in which, despite it seeming natural, just like anything else, it's not natural, and it has a history, and that history has been so lost to us that it now seems as if it's natural and comes from nowhere, rather than from the specific source of it in ancient Greek philosophy, which struck the philosopher as strange and caused him to think and to wonder, which is where we just left off, was talking about how important wonder is for Heidegger. Philosophy always begins in wonder. Okay, let's keep reading. So we're right here on our confidence. And if you've missed any of it, you're always, just so everyone knows, all the streams, they're available on my page, and they're also available on YouTube. So if you're curious about any of what I was just talking about, they'll be on YouTube. Okay. Our confidence in the current interpretation of the thing is only seemingly well-founded. But in addition, this thing concept, the thing as bearer of its characteristics, holds not only of the mere thing in its proper sense, but also of any being whatsoever. Hence, it cannot be used to set apart thingly beings from non-thingly beings. Yet even before all reflection, attentive dwelling within the sphere of things already tells us that this thing concept does not hit upon the thingly element of the thing, its independent and self-contained character. Occasionally, we still have the feeling that violence has long been done to the thingly element of things, and that thought has played a part in this violence, for which reason people disavow thought instead of taking pains to make it more thoughtful. But in defining the essence of the thing, what is the use of a feeling, however certain, if thought alone has the right to speak here? Perhaps, however, what we call feeling or mood here and in similar instances is more reasonable. That is, oh, sorry, I missed the transition on the page. That is more intelligently perceptive, because more open to being than all that reason which, having meanwhile become ratio, which is the Latin word that became reason, was misinterpreted as being rational. The hankering after the irrational as abortive offspring of the unthought rational therewith performed a curious service. To be sure, the current thing concept always fits each thing. Nevertheless, it does not lay hold of the thing as it is in its own being, but makes an assault upon it. So it's becoming clear here as I'm reading this that I think 2 hours is about all I have for Heidegger or for philosophy in terms of streaming it, because my brain starts turning to jelly. So I'll just do this paragraph, and I think because I do want to stream for a little bit longer, especially since you just showed up, Luminous Intensity. So I think I'll do this paragraph, and then we'll just do some Elden Ring or something, so I can keep streaming for a little bit. But my brain is too jelly to do philosophy for much longer than 2 or 3 hours. Well, even 3 hours is too long, I think. Because my this text requires careful attention that I'm not going to be able to give it if I keep going. I guess 2 hours actually. I've been going for 2 hours, which is a long time actually to be doing some intense philosophical thinking, facing up to the task of thinking. But let's do this paragraph though. And in fact, I think there was a lot in there, so let's go back to it and go through piece by piece a little bit. Our confidence in the current interpretation of the thing is only seemingly well-founded. But in addition, this thing concept, the thing as bearer of its characteristics, holds not only of the mere thing in its proper sense, but also of any being whatsoever. Right? In other words, as we've already said, the definition of thing that includes all things in the world is a basically meaningless definition. It's so broad it becomes meaningless. In fact, like Aristotle's idea of definition, that it has to be differentiated, which is the only way that being can become being is through differentiation. So a definition that includes everything is essentially not a definition at all, which is why Aristotle famously says you can't define being, because being is everything. So if it's everything, then it can't be anything it's not, and if there's nothing it's not, then it can't have a meaningful definition. So he's reduced thing down to saying mere things, which is things like clumps of soil, right? So nothing that would have consciousness, and also nothing that would be an artifact, something like created by humans or something like that, right? But rocks is the examples he's given, is rocks, clumps of soil, things like that. Mere things. The German word we found is Bros. But this definition, this first definition of thing as the substance which bears characteristics, could not be applied only and exclusively to mere things, but rather to things in general. And in that sense, it doesn't make any sense to as a definition. It could hold of any being whatsoever. I could have a substance and my secondary qualities, whatever I think my substance is, and then on top of it, my appearance, my features, things like that. Hence, it cannot be used to set apart thingly beings from non-thingly beings. Yet even before all reflection, attentive dwelling within the sphere of things already tells us that this thing concept does not hit upon the thingly element of the thing, its independent and self-combined character. Occasionally, we still have the feeling that violence has long been done to the thingly element of the thing, and that thought has played a part in this violence, for which reason people disavow thought instead of taking pains to make it more thoughtful. right? So there is this connection, and this is something that Derrida picks up on from Heidegger, between thought and violence. And that this thought has done some violence to the thingly character of the thing. By this definition of thing as substance and bearer of qualities, we also, in addition to it not being useful enough to pick out things as things on this definition of the mere thing, but also that the mere thing has had some violence done to it that has no longer allowed it to be it even that has been lost. We can't even say anymore what the stoniness of the stone is because of the violence of thought. And so he says this. He says, thought has played a part in this violence, for which reason people disavow thought instead of taking pains to make it more thoughtful. Right. So I think that violence was this is disavowing thought. Right. It's a kind of a tricky double move, because the violence of thought is the refusal to think in a certain way, but we're always already inside of thought. But to refuse to think is to refuse to face up to the task of thinking, which is something that Heidegger is always emphasizing, facing up to the task of thinking. And refusing to face up the task of thinking, in this case, is to not take for granted these kind of inherited ideas about being of any kind, but in this case, the being of the thing from ancient Greece, right? This kind of just taking things for granted that we have received from tradition, rather than rethinking them or holding them open to question or rethinking. How have I've lost my page somehow. There we go. Okay. But in defining the essence of the thing, what is the use of a feeling, however certain, if thought alone has the right to speak here? Right. So there's potentially a contrast being made here between thought and feeling. Right. Perhaps, however, what we call feeling or mood, and remember that for Heidegger, mood is very important, because mood is not only something, in fact, it's not at all something applied by a subject to a world, but rather it's we dwell within a mood. A mood is a way in which the world becomes open to us. Perhaps, however, what we call feeling or mood here and in similar instances is more reasonable, that is, more intelligently perceptive, because more open to being than all that reason which, having meanwhile become ratio, was misinterpreted as being rational. So there's a distinction being made between reasonable in the just bare sense of thinking well or thinking in a way that we ought to aspire to, and capital R reason, which is the reason he uses ratio, is right. That's the Latin root that gives us rationality. And so he's trying to disavow that whole tradition of rationality in its most loaded sense, inherited from the Western tradition, and from especially, he thinks, the way what is lost in taking Greek and turning it into this ossified tradition that becomes Western thought or something like that in Rome, in Rome's appropriation of Greek thought. It's interesting. Luminous intensity. Feel free if you have thoughts to, or things you want to say to chat. Perhaps, however, what we call feeling or mood here and in similar instances is more reasonable. And that gloss to make clear that distinction between this capital R reason and just reasonable, just thinking well, is this little aside that is more intelligently perceptive, right? So perception to the thingliness of the thing, to letting the thing show itself, and us being perceptive, intelligently perceptive, to its becoming intelligible for us, this relation between seer and seeing, between Dasein and being, is in fact feeling or mood, Heidegger is saying, might actually be more intelligently perceptive, therefore more reasonable than ratio or rationality. The hankering after the irrational as abortive offspring of the unthought rational therewith performed a curious service. That's kind of a weird metaphor. The hankering after the irrational. The more I look at it, that is a really weird sentence. The hankering after the irrational. What is the unthought rational? I guess the hankering after the irrational, after feeling or mood rather than reason, I guess in the sense it would be offspring, in the sense that both would be, this is a sort of unfortunate metaphor, but offspring, that, like the feeling or mood are the bastard children, the unwanted children of, if we're going with that Plato sense of, giving birth to the concept and thinking, the unwanted or bastard child is feeling or mood, rather as opposed to the perfect, golden child of rationality or something like that. I mean, maybe that's what that metaphor is supposed to do there. The hankering after the irrational performed a curious service. We could also, one thing that's useful when you get these little like poetic asides in Heidegger is to just look up like curious. That's actually interesting. So the Latin root of curious, assuming Google is correct, is cura in Latin, care. Now, for Heidegger, being is the being of Dasein is tied to care and concern, right? A care for the world. So curious has this root in care. And then if we look at, what was the other one? Curious service. What is the root of that? Oh, the root is slave for that. Well, yeah, that takes us all kinds of places. But and we also don't know the reason I don't always do this with Heidegger is that we're looking up the translations. So, but then it seems like something Heidegger might want us to do, even in English, as English speakers, to look up English etymologies. But a curious, you can take these kind of poetic asides and try to read them like poetry, like look up the etymologies of the words and trace what kind of meaning landscapes being created by the words. The hankering after the irrational. Oh, let's look up one more. Let's look up hankering. Probably related to hang. Okay. So that one we I don't know if that helps us really, but the hankering after the irrational as abortive offspring of the unthought rational therefore performed a curious service. To be sure, the current thing concept always fits each thing. Nevertheless, it does not lay hold of the thing as it is in its own being, but makes an assault upon it. Just a second. So the last sentence is the kind of Heidegger's famous, let things be. Let things be, let things be, let things be, let things be. The hankering after the irrational, as abortive offspring of the unthought rational, therewith performed a curious service. I mean, I guess a curious service is like, so far I'm not getting the kind of great reveal that I'm hoping for with this poetic reading of the line, but I think, in a sense that it performed a caring service, or in service to thought or something, right? Master slave relationship, maybe, I don't know, between being and thought, or between Dasein and being, or Dasein and thinking. There's a performed a curious, that is a caring or a careful, full of care, service to thought, which is hankering or hanging for the irrational, for feeling or mood, despite these supposedly being the bastard children or abortive offspring of the unthought rational, or something like that. That's one way, I guess, to read that kind of weird poetic aside. To be sure, the current thing concept always fits each thing. In other words, if there's a problem with this understanding of the thing, the problem is not that it's inapplicable. It can be applied indiscriminately almost to everything, but in fact that might precisely be the problem with it, that it's too it can explain everything, but not in a way that actually lays hold of the thing in its own being, which is what you get in the next sentence. It doesn't let things be or let them show themselves as they are in their own difference, but rather it forces them to submit to the demands of its paradigm, right? It in the sense that, Hegel or someone might talk about it, you go out into the world and make everything identical with yourself. I'm not going out and seeing difference. I'm going out there and seeing identity, and capturing everything under the, all-consuming, totalizing model of rationality, or something like that, of ratio, rather than, restoring to them their difference. That's what Heidegger's saying. My own thoughts on that we can talk about some other time. I've read my Nagarastani. Can such an assault perhaps be avoided? Oh, why did it do that? Can such an assault perhaps be avoided, and how? Only certainly by granting the thing, as it were, a free field to display its thingly character directly. If you've read The Question Concerning Technology, this one might be that might sound familiar to you, right? That technology dominates everything, but that instead we need a free relation to technology, right? There's a concern with freedom that runs all the way, well, through philosophy, but certainly through Hegel, through Marx, through a number of post-Hegelian thinkers, really in a certain slightly different way in Kant also, with this concern with freedom versus necessity. And it's in Heidegger too, right? This granting the thing, as it were, a free field to display its thingly character directly. But so it's also that connection between freedom and self-determination, right? Because it's not freedom, when we're talking in the German philosophy sense, freedom is nothing like, what Americans mean by freedom in the sense of, I can buy my guns or whatever, right? It's freedom to self-determine, right? The quote unquote positive freedom versus negative freedom. The freedom to be what you are, which might be have a certain relationship to necessity or law, but the freedom to display your thingly. So in the case of the thing, the freedom for the thing to display its thingly character directly, which is precisely what technology does not let the soil or something do, because it controls the soil and turns it into standing reserve or resources for human projects and robs it of its being and its own being or its own ability to be soil or something, right? Which I think Heidegger would say, say certain types of relations between humans and the soil wouldn't do that. If it's a kind of rural farming or something like that, there's a mutual codependence between humans and the soil, where the soil is what it is and the human is what they are, as opposed to the domination of the soil in like industrialized farming or something like that. But that's going a little far afield, and I don't want to talk about that because that's not this essay. That's a totally different essay and its own mode of thinking. But so the thing, as it were, you need to avoid the assault of thought that submits the thing to the demands of rationality. You need to allow the thing the free field to display its thingly character directly. Everything that might interpose itself between the thing and us in apprehending and talking about it must first be set aside. That's that phenomenological part in Heidegger coming out, the concrete immediacy of the giving. Only then do we yield ourselves to the undistorted presencing of the thing. But we do not need first to call or arrange for this situation in which we let things encounter us without mediation. The situation always prevails. In what the senses of sight, hearing, and touch convey, in the sensations of color, sound, roughness, hardness, things move us bodily in the literal meaning of the word. The thing is the aistheton, that which is perceptible by sensations in the senses belonging to sensibility. Hence the concept later becomes a commonplace according to which a thing is nothing but the unity of a manifold of what is given in the senses. Whether this unity is conceived as sum or as totality or as gestalt alters nothing in the standard character of this thing concept. So we're moving from the first definition, the to hypokamenon, the thing as the core and characteristic properties that occur alongside it, substance with accidents. We're moving to the thing as isotheton, which I assume is connected to, in fact, we could just look it up. I assume it's connected to aesthetics. I'm guessing isthetai is related to isotheton. It's perception, I guess, actually, is the root of that. That which is perceived by the senses, right? Thing is the manifold of senses. So in a certain way, it's sort of the opposite of what we were just talking about, where the thing is this kind of unaccessed substantial core of a thing, and we can see the secondary qualities but not the primary qualities. This is the opposite. The primary qualities are that which is perceived by the senses. It's the most direct encounter with the thing. So this would be another kind of possible definition of the thing inherited from ancient Greek philosophy. And would this be, this is the question, I guess, a way of granting a free field for the thing to display its thingly character directly? Right, so the situation always prevails in which things encounter us without mediation. I mean, this sounds like sense certainty. I think this is going to be one of those times when Heidegger says something and almost seems to be arguing for it, and maybe is, but since we're underway to thought, he's later going to turn back and say, but wait, that's obviously wrong, because I don't think Heidegger actually thinks this. But he says that the situation always prevails in which things encounter us without mediation. In what the senses of sight, hearing, and touch convey, in the sensations of color, sound, roughness, hardness, things move us bodily in the literal meaning of the word. The thing is the isotheton, that which is perceptible by sensations in the senses belonging to sensibility. Hence the concept later becomes a commonplace according to which a thing is nothing but the unity of a manifold of what is given in the senses. Right, so there is, you kind of throw away that whole concept of the core. The thing is just what is given in the manifold of the senses. So it says, well, the unity of a manifold sounds like Husserl. The senses part does not. Whether this unity is conceived as sum or as totality or as gestalt alters nothing in the standard character of this thing concepts, right? So there's different views. I guess sum kind of sounds like Hume a little bit. Gestalt, I mean, maybe he does kind of have Husserl in mind here. Totality could be, I don't know, Hegel, maybe Marx. But yeah, so that's the isotheton, right? We get what that is. That's the thing as sum total of sensuous experiences of it. It's constructed out of its sensuality. Now, this interpretation of the thingness of the thing is as correct and demonstrable in every case as the previous one. This already suffices to cast doubt on its truth, right? Just like the other one, I mean, by thing we mean mere thing, so we don't mean me, for instance, but certainly you could give a sum total of all your sensuous experiences of me, everything you see of me, everything you touch of me, everything you smell of me or something, right? That could apply just as well to this as to mere things. So it sounds like this is way too broad of a definition to be meaningful. So that already cast doubt on its truth, but it looks like there's going to be more problems. If we consider, moreover, that we are searching for, the thingly character of the thing, then this thing concept again leaves us at a loss. We never really first perceive a throng of sensations, e.g., tones and noises, in the appearance of things, as this thing concept alleges. Rather, we hear the storm whistling in the chimney, we hear the three-motored plane, we hear the Mercedes in immediate distinction from the Volkswagen. Heidegger is a car nerd, perhaps secretly. Much closer to us than all sensations are the things themselves. We hear the doors shut in the house and never hear acoustical sensations or even mere sounds. In order to hear a bare sound, we have to listen away from things, divert our ear from them, i.e., listen abstractly. So I think that's actually rather clear what he means by that. But an example of this would be, I was listening one time to a podcast about Hume on the philosophy podcast Partially Examined Life. And they were talking about, Hume talks about, the bare simples that you get via your sense data, and then also talks about more complex things that you can construct by combining those simples together, which is one of also how you can get fantastical objects. You can never see a gold mountain, but if you've experienced gold and you've experienced mountain, then you can put them together in your faculties of cognition, and you can imagine a golden mountain. But what they were talking about, and they were kind of asking this question, and I don't know if Hume has an answer for this or not, but if I remember right, they couldn't find one in at least the text that they looked at. What makes a simple? Because a mountain could theoretically be broken down into smaller simples or larger simples, right? And there's the kind of complex discussion of where exactly does the line of the mountain end and the line of the ground begin, the plains below it or whatever. So how does Hume, how is the simple organized into a thing? And I think that's a way of what Heidegger's saying here. It's not right to just say you hear the vibration of a certain sound in terms of how we perceive it. You hear the sound, the storm whistling in the chimney. You don't just hear it and go, what is this sound? You hear the thing. You hear the storm in the chimney, right? You hear it already as a thing. Just like you don't just see disparate, disconnected colors, green and brown, and you work your way eventually and you say, oh, well, that's a mountain. You see it and you already take it as a mountain. You hear it and you already hear it as the motor of a car. Philosophers sometimes talk about it this way. They talk about building up the sensations to get to a whole complete view of the thing. But that's not how anyone in real life does it. That's only how philosophers do it. And it's a dig at philosophers a little bit. Philosophers disconnected from the real world. That in the real world, you get a sensation and you know it's a sensation of a thing. You can't just think abstractly without thinking of something. And you also can't just experience abstractly without having an experience of something, which is the point that Heidegger is making here. And that's, so in addition to that not really matching up with our experience, it doesn't make sense really as giving us a definition of a thing, because the thing is something that is it's the thing that is given in the sensations. When you have a sensation of this sound, you have a sensation of the motor of the Volkswagen. And that's what we're trying to figure out, the thingly character of the thing, of the Volkswagen or something. I mean, we already, as we discussed, that's not even a mere thing, so that kind of makes us confused already. But putting that to aside for a moment, that's what we're trying to figure out. So this definition isn't really giving us what we want, because we're focusing on the sensations, which are abstracted away from the thing itself, and we're trying to get closer to the thing itself, not further. So that's what's going on there, at least I think, and I feel pretty confident about that. In the thing concept just mentioned, there is not so much an assault upon the thing as rather an inordinate attempt to bring it into the greatest possible proximity to us. But a thing never reaches that position as long as we assign as its thingly feature what is perceived by the senses. Whereas the first interpretation keeps the thing at arm's length from us, as it were, and sets it too far off, the second makes it press too physically upon us. In both interpretations, the thing vanishes. It is therefore necessary to avoid the exaggerations of both. The thing itself must be allowed to remain in its self-containment. It must be accepted in its own steadfastness. This the third interpretation seems to do, which is just as old as the first two. So we're going to move on to the third interpretation, but quickly. Actually, before I say this, let's look up what the root of assault is. So the root is to leap, which is kind of odd. How does to leap become to assault? Did I write anything about this? Thanks. Yeah, I think this is at some point when I'm done with this, I want to make a video about etymology and Heidegger, because I think, this is necessary for thinking about poetry. It's not very commonly done in philosophy, but Heidegger's explicitly trying to do philosophy, which essentially turns into poetry. And it shows how the later work that seems extremely difficult and confusing becomes actually fairly intelligible when you understand that you have to read it like poetry. You have to look up etymologies and do these kind of poetic readings of it. But so the first one was an assault upon the thing, I think already kind of as we just said, because it attempts to submit things to rationality, to make them force them to conform to the structure of rationality. But this one, Heidegger sort of presents it as a possible avoidance of that assault, because you focus, concretely on the way things appear to you, the smell, the touch, the taste. But the problem, I think he's suggesting, is that he says that we make them press too physically upon us. He says here, in both interpretations, the thing vanishes. It's like, if you think about it metaphorically, it's basically like you throw the thing so far away that it's lost in the first interpretation. In the second one, you bring it so close to you that it disappears, right? In a certain way, it could be like what I was talking about earlier with the painting, that you go up close to look at it. And you look at it so closely that you can't even see what it's depicting anymore, and you just see the chipped paint and the thingliness of it. That's a certain way that you bring it so close to yourself that it loses its kind of gestalt. And the example is the ones he just gave, right? That you're trying to describe the thingliness of, the dirt or the motor, but you're losing, it turns into just disconnected, abstracted perceptions that lose the thing as a unity in a certain way. It's so up close you can't even see the unity anymore. Versus when it's, so far away that you're denying that substance is even accessible, that it's purely, it can be accessed maybe by reason, thinking out its essential qualities, but you can't actually ever encounter them. It's pushed so far away that it can't even have a space to be or to appear, because it can only be what is constructed through reason. So the third interpretation tries to find a middle road between those two. And that interpretation, I think, basically is Aristotle's definition from the Metaphysics. Sorry, I moved away from the mic just now. Which is matter and form and matter, hyli and morphe. And at first, Heidegger's going to make us seem like this is a nice definition, but then you're going to quickly see that he's going to point out a lot of problems that he sees with it. And we're going to do that tomorrow, because I've done as much as I can do for today of the philosophy.